Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to our third session of the chess workshop. Just want to remind you guys again, it is really important if you guys want to talk to please mute yourselves and just mute yourselves right after you guys are finished talking so there's no interruptions. And then when you are talking, just remember to turn on your video so we can see you. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Jay Wu now.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third workshop. Last time we talked about pawn and piece play, about like where we should move our pieces and different types of pawn structures and all that stuff. And we also started to learn about a really important concept of tactics, which I plan on further teaching in this workshop. Not really new concepts, but kind of trying to help you guys get better at the things that we already talked about. So I talked about 4 different tactical things: the fork, the pin, the discovered attack, and the undermining, which is pretty much removing the defender. And so the first thing we're going to do is just we're going to do some puzzles, which are on these 4 different themes first, to kind of just warm ourselves up, I guess. And it's always important to kind of just try learning, using your own time to work on these things to kind of become better. And tactic is always like a very important thing to become better at. So it can't hurt. So we had to, let me select discovered attack. We have pinned, we have removing the defender, and we have, what was the last one? Forks, right? Forks. Okay. So everyone can see the board. Take a look at the board. This is just a basic puzzle. So first, just figure out. Oh, it kind of already tells you what the topic is. Oh no, it doesn't tell you the topic. It tells you the 4 different topics. Yeah. So just go ahead and make a suggestion. Any moves that come to mind at first?
Knight to c2.
2? Does everyone think that move is the right move?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it seems like, and then we take the rook, right? So it was a fork on the king and the rook here. All right. So I think that's pretty easy. What about this one? Hold on. Okay. Arnav, are you raising your? Okay. Arnav, go ahead.
Kill the white pawn from the black pawn, which is
This move?
6. Yeah.
Okay, so after I take this pawn, then let's say he takes me back.
Yeah.
Right? Then what? We traded a pawn for a pawn, right?
Yeah.
So try looking for something that is going to win you a lot of material or is going to like lead to a really big advantage. Because you could trade these pawns, but there's something that's much better here in this particular position. Does anyone have any other ideas? Achinthia, go ahead.
White bishop to c5.
Which bishop?
That one.
This one?
No, the white one.
This one?
Yeah. And then move it over here diagonally.
To what square?
To be to b5.
But this pawn here covers that square. So it's white's turn. Sorry, I mean it's black's turn. We're playing on black's side right now, so we're looking for a move for black. Nidesh is raising his hand. Go ahead.
See?
Pawn to e5 is black pawn.
Pawn to e5. Okay, so what's the idea behind pawn to e5?
So
after
that,
I play, okay, go ahead.
So that you can capture the queen.
Okay, is that okay? So, well, isn't this pawn also controlling that square? So if I go here, can't he just take me back? Right. So before he, yeah. So this move would be good if I could actually, if I had enough support on this square, right? He has 3 different pieces here guarding this square, as you can see. So I don't have enough control of this square to put my piece there. I only have a queen that's guarding that square, right? So, Shivtane. Sorry, I don't know how to. Can you correct me real quick? How do you say your name?
It's Shiv. You can
Just
say
Shiv.
short for
Okay.
Shiv.
All right, Shiv.
You can move the bishop to c5
Bishop to c5. This guy. All right. So what's the point of bishop c5?
because the queen's gonna kill the bishop, but then the queen can kill the queen.
So why doesn't the queen just move? Right? If you attack his queen, why can't he just move his queen?
Because it's gonna be in check.
Right. Good job. So does everyone see that? So pretty much Shiv's move kind of just puts the queen into a pin, as you see, right? So by moving your bishop here, you've kind of made the queen pinned to the king here. So the queen can't move because it puts white in check. So this move right here is actually just going to win the queen as a whole. So white is forced to just take your bishop, and you can just recapture it, right? Does everyone see that? So you move there, yeah, and he can't move his queen, so we just win. We win the queen there. All right. Okay. So it's white to play here. Black just played this move. Yeah. So what is white's best move in this position?
Bishop to G3.
I heard bishop g3. Who is that speaking?
Nat.
Nat. Okay. So what's the idea behind bishop g3?
It checks the king and also attacks the rook.
Right. Okay. So this is what is this? This is a fork, right? So by moving my bishop here, I attack the king and the rook at the same time, and black is forced to move his king, right? And then now we just win the rook. Okay, so it seems like you guys kind of get the fork concept better. It's like the easiest one to see, which is good, because it's good to have that one mastered first. Okay, this one's a bit more difficult. This is actually a new tactic, one of the new topics that we covered. So it's white to play here, and as you see, you're down material right now, right? You have 2 rooks and a knight, and he has a rook and a queen. So you need to find something to win some material back. Arnav, go ahead.
If we move the knight, which is on f3 to d5, it will be a check.
Right.
Black king on h7.
Okay. So isn't he controlling that square? So what if he takes me back? I move my knight here. What if he takes me?
Oh.
You're on the right track. That's a good move. Keep thinking. So he takes me, but what does this knight move do for you? Look at your rook right here, right?
Yeah.
So by moving your knight here, what does this rook now do that I didn't do before? Do you know the answer? You can go ahead. Anyone?
Yeah, the rook can capture the queen.
Right. So Arnav, do you see that? So when white moves his knight here, right, it puts the black king in check. So he will respond by taking your knight, right, to get himself out of check. But by moving here, he has uncovered this discovered attack, right? The knight was here originally. Do you see that? So by moving this knight here, now you kind of unleash this attack on the queen with your rook. So after this, we won. We gave up our knight, but we got his queen. Do you see that? Oh wow, this one's difficult. Okay, this is good. This is the last topic that we had. So yeah, take a look. You're playing as white now, and try to look for a move that's going to win material for white.
The pawn on f4 to f5.
Okay, so we have this suggestion as a move. So what is the point of f4 to f5?
The queen is attacking the bishop on g3, and the pawn is attacking the queen. So you either have to save the bishop or the queen, and it's obviously going to be the queen.
Okay, so by playing this move, the queen is currently protecting the bishop, right? But when you play this move right here, the queen can't protect the bishop anymore, right? But the bishop, because this bishop guards this square right here, right? Does everyone see that? So when I push this pawn here, your bishop on c1 right here controls this square, and this square is controlled by your pawn. So black has no moves to to keep his bishop protected, right? So when I make this move, black's queen has to retreat, and he can't protect it. And now I win this, right? So that was the removing the defender tactic, where I just kicked away the defender first, and then I win the piece. All right, so it seems like people, yeah. So seems like everyone should go home whenever they're practicing. You should practice these puzzles a lot more, because they'll help you a lot in game if you're able to recognize them, and it'll just increase your tactical ability, which is just one of the most important things of becoming a better chess player. So let's go back to the, okay. All right, so we've been talking a lot about tactics, right? And I think tactics is one of 3 things that we should be able to master to become a better chess player, right? So tactics is kind of like the most basic thing, because it's kind of more direct. It's like puzzles. You can kind of go into them immediately. So the hardest thing to do, which these are the 3 fishes of chess, which is kind of a concept that was in a really famous chess book that I read when I was younger. The first thing is one of the hardest things to get better at, which is positional judgment. So understanding pretty much being able to assess what the position is, right? Like, are you in a winning position? Are you losing? What types of things you need to do, right? What are your strengths in your position? Kind of things like this, right? Understanding where you stand in a certain position. Because for, let's say, a lot of the time people will be losing, right? And their king is being attacked, and they don't acknowledge that fact, right? They'll just be like, oh, I don't care about my king. I just want to, I want to push my pawns right here, or I want to do something else, right? They haven't assessed their position correctly. And because of that, they're going to end up losing, because the opponent will just, continue attacking the king, and you're going to end up losing. So obviously it gets more complicated as your skill level increases, but that's pretty much the basics of judging, understanding where you stand in any position. And this is the thing. The next thing is a thing that we've been talking about, is kind of just training your eye, right? So when you look at a position, you can kind of see these combinations that are going on, right? These tactics. And this is kind of the concept that you can train the most easily. Is because it's just like the more puzzles you do, the better you're good at it. While positional judgment comes more from experience, like actual in-game experience. So that takes a lot longer to develop. And the last thing is the ability to analyze variations. So we'll actually cover that a little bit. Pretty much whenever we make a move, we have to be able to see further in the future, right? We make this move, and our opponent is going to make another move in response, right? And then we're going to make a move. So the further you're able to analyze, right, and hold those things in your brain, the better you'll be at making the right decisions. Because if you can assess the outcomes of all these different possibilities, and you figure out which one's the best, then you're obviously going to be making a very good move in the very end, right? So that's also known as calculation, which is we'll get into in a second. Okay, so I just wanted to let you guys know like what the point of tactics is in the whole grand scheme of things, right? So that's what we already did. We did some tactical training. And I think I had a question last time, which was like something about if my games never had tactics. So sometimes you're playing a game and you find that, oh, none of these things ever happen, right? I don't ever get any forks or pins, or these are so like rare situations. Um, so I'm actually going to show you some games to kind of illustrate what when these types of games happen where you don't have any tactics. And I'll just talk about this question, try to explain it the best I can using some games. And then we're going to be talking about mood selection, which I kind of already covered a little bit, but we'll get into that in more detail. And if we have time, we'll analyze the game we had last time, because we all thought about that game. So it's good to analyze a game that we've all kind of already, we've all played, so we already know what we were thinking during that game. And then like last time, we'll spend like the last 30 minutes to kind of try to apply the things we've learned and play a online game and try to increase our rating again. All right, so to adjust that question, we're going to talk about these two games. The first game is a game between Yui and Alekhine in 1937. Yui is black and Alekhine, Yui is white and Alekhine is black. And this game is kind of is a really high level Grandmaster game. And I want to show you it because it kind of illustrates the importance of learning tactics, especially in this game. And it'll kind of show how valuable it is to be able to calculate things and see these combinations. So the game starts off I kind of just want to just be very brief on this because we don't have a lot of time. So I'll kind of speed through the opening real quickly. So the opening is just a bunch of things that they both memorized, and I think this is okay. So this is pretty much normal stuff, right? Black is actually, as you can already see, black and white are already initiating very, very, very heavily in the center, right? All these combinations are coming out right now, right? So there's so many things that you have to consider already. And there's already this pin, right? This pressure on this knight. So there's a bunch of things going on, and it's really confusing already this early into the opening, right? So, okay, so black, I think white makes this move here, and black retreats his knight, right? And then I think these captures go on, and then white castles. All right, so the kind of like all that chaos in the center kind of resolved itself after people kind of made all those exchanges. And then black makes this move to develop his knight, and then white decides to do this. And then kind of initiating another exchange of pawns. And so it's really hard to explain all these things. I just want to show you how there's so many tactics going on already in this position, right? So there's ideas by kicking this knight. There's ideas of pinning this knight. There's a discovered attack on this bishop right here. And there's so many things that white has already. And black's king is still not castled, and he has to address this. So even more tactics are probably going to arise. So black decides to address this issue first because I have this threat of discovering attack the bishop. So he retreats his bishop here. And okay, so white decides to just pressure this knight, right? Put him, kind of make him have to move his knight away by pushing this pawn. And he decides to come here to pressure this pawn. So now he's attacking this pawn. So white decides to protect it. And then black does this and forks the bishop and the knight. So as you can see already, black is also having his own ideas tactically. So initially white had all these ideas. Now black is putting his knights on these squares and kind of putting pressure on white all of a sudden. So this game becomes a lot more complicated very quickly. White makes a move here that's just kind of hard to see, but instead of moving his his queen away, and then black can just take his bishop, he first makes a check, right, with his bishop. So black can't take because he has to adjust this issue first. And he ends up moving his king, and now white can get out of the attack without losing his bishop. So now black continuously applies pressure on white's position. Now he's starting to attack this pawn, right? And so white sees this, obviously, and retreats his knight here to defend this pawn. So do you see how now black is like suddenly pressuring white a lot more, but in this case, white is actually doing fine here. It seems like white is doing really badly because he has to retreat, but black's king is out of center. Black has a lot of problems with his position. Yeah, the position is really, really chaotic right now. Like, honestly, I don't even know what's going on at this point. Now black develops this bishop, and now he makes another threat for white. Now he's starting to make this fork, right? Does everyone see that? So he controls this square, and now he threatens this fork. So more tactics are coming along right now. So instead of addressing this fork, which he's not really able to right now, he just decides to attack this knight, right? If he can make black kind of take a move to retreat his knight, then he doesn't have to address this immediately. But instead, black just plays this move, and it might seem like really, really like, well, what is this move, right? Because I'm giving up away my knight here. But after something like this, and let's say my knight retreats, then black has these ideas, right? He's kind of kicked away the knight, and now he has ideas with checkmate here. But he's opened up the file with the rook, and now he's preparing a checkmate. So this move is is actually a very, very hard move to see, and a really, really good move. So instead of taking, white knows that's no good, so he decides to kind of get rid of this issue immediately. And black finds another option is to put pressure on this pawn again by putting his queen here. Okay, we have queen b6, and then we have knight h4. So the whole idea of showing you this game is just to show you guys how chaotic some games can become, right? So now I apply up here, and he has pressure here, and then these threats are coming, and this pawn's attacking this knight, right? So many things are going on, and this game probably took them so much brain power to think about, and it took them a long time to calculate all these things. As you can see, there's so much interaction between the pieces right now. That's pretty much all I needed to show you. It's just kind of the importance of being able to see tactics, right? Being able to, okay, well, I need to adjust these issues and these issues and these issues. So a lot of that comes into play when we're studying tactics. And then, okay, this game's still here. Yeah, okay, this game is still here. So this is the other game. This is the Taimanov versus Geller game in 1953, I believe. And this game played out a bit differently. So we'll just kind of go through the game real quickly. Okay, so this is called the King's Indian opening that black plays. And it's pretty typical stuff. All right, so we get to this position. And as you can see, all the pawns are kind of just clogged up in the center here, right? So no one can really push anything. And all black pieces are kind of staying in his territory, and all white pieces are staying in his territory, right? So this is the typical question I get, like, okay, well, what is white gonna do to win? Or what is black gonna do to win, right? Nothing's going on, there are no tactics. So at this point, yeah, a lot of these high-level games won't have any tactics because grandmasters won't fall into any of these positions where they're actually losing material, where none of those things will ever show up in these games, right? So in these games, how they're won is by strategical planning, right? So white has to come up with a plan, right? That's also an idea that I want you guys to understand, that you always want to have a plan when you're playing in any position. So white here, there's no tactics, so I can't just win material for free. I need to come up with an idea, right, to make my position better. Whenever there are no tactics, you'll see that a lot of time black and white will just maneuver their pieces around and not really do much. So, white makes this pawn move, black maneuvers this knight here, white makes this pawn move. It's pretty bland, right? And then black makes this move, I make that move, nothing's really going on. Black makes this move, development, pawn move, take the knight back, right? So 5 moves later, nothing really happened, right? Still, the position is very non-tactical, and nothing's really going on, right? White's idea here is just to pretty much create some type of play for him, right? If he doesn't do anything at all, you'll notice that black is not really doing much either. He's kind of just shifting his pieces around, kind of waiting for white to come up with something to do. So white decides that, okay, I need to create an open file here, right? So I need to open up, now you see that? So by pushing this pawn here, he's trying to trade the pawns off. So he can create this open file here, right? And now he puts his rook on there. Okay, so now white has something, at least, right? It's not really clear what this open file is going to do for him, but he has something right now, at least. Black just continues doing nothing, really, and he starts to move his queen, or his pieces, toward this side to try to create something, or try to do something here. Black's just kind of attacking, not really doing much, and nothing really going on, just some few moves. Actually here, black retreats his knight all the way back. So he moved his knight here, and then actually went back. So he wasted a bunch of moves here, but he's doing this because he just doesn't see what white can do here. White has no tactics. The position's completely closed. All his pieces are kind of just in the back rank again. All his pieces are protected. Nothing can happen, right? So pretty much, yeah, so white, his idea is, okay, now I will put my other rook on this file and I will stack the rooks together, right? So now I'm putting pressure on this knight and I have full control of this file. So you can see white's trying to play on this side of the board, right? Kind of ignoring this side right now. Black so black just attacks the queen and initiates a queen trade. Nothing really going on, just defending the pawn. But yeah, black is just, just trying to be like, okay, get out of my territory here. So retreats, and then, retreats. And at this point, what white has done is he's kind of made all of black's pieces kind of come toward this side of the board, right? Come toward this area of the board. So his idea is to kind of decoy his opponent. So by putting all his pieces here, he kind of creates some threats on this side and forces all of black to kind of move all of his forces toward this side of the board, toward this half of the board, right? Now all he has is a knight, and this rook doesn't really do much. So now he starts to march his pawns on this side of the board. And he's kind of shifting, he decides, okay, I'm going to shift my focus. I'm going to now start attacking black's king, because all his pieces are on the wrong side of the board right now. And I can maneuver my pieces over to attack him very, very easily, faster than he can bring his pieces back, right? Because his pieces don't have much mobility back here. And he's utilizing that. He has this area, this space advantage. So black can't really do anything. And as you can see in this position, now white has created some very, very, very tasty outposts for his knight. And as you'll soon see, he's going to shift his pieces back over to the king. And now you notice that, wow, like 20 moves ago, there was a bunch of pieces here and the king was totally safe. After creating these rooks on here and kind of decoying all his pieces to be over here, now it seems like he's a little bit too late, right? So now his pieces are not coordinating to protect his king, and all of my pieces are in the right positions to attack him. So what do you notice between these two types of games? So actually here, black is completely lost because this idea is going to come and then he's going to maneuver his queen around to checkmate him. And there's nothing black can really do. And he also can't move his bishop because of this threat right here. So black's completely paralyzed and is completely lost here. But you can see nothing really tactical happened, right? Nothing like, oh, I fork and then I win your queen or something, right? None of that happened. It was all just black doing nothing, kind of maneuvering, waiting for what white wanted to do. And white just positionally outplayed him, right? So if there are no tactics, yeah, you're going to have to find a very more advanced plan, like a much more advanced plan, like Taimanov did here, right? So he was like, okay, I'm going to take advantage of this file, and then I will switch over my attacks after I've decoyed all his pieces onto this side. So yeah, there's a lot of strategy that can go into chess, and we'll cover those in later sessions. All right, so yeah, so what do we notice between the games? The first one, very technical, very tactical. You need to use your brain a lot more, right? The second game, the guy just like, okay, well, I'm not really doing anything. I'm just going to move my pieces around. And then white was just like, he had a strategy in mind. He just had to follow that strategy and ended up winning without having to calculate a bunch of lines and like hold a bunch of things in his brain, like, oh, do I take this piece or do I do that, right? It was none of that because all the pieces were kind of just not really attacking each other. Now I'll be talking about the process of making a move. All right, so obviously chess is all about making the right moves. And I'll talk about kind of what I think about in every position. Every time I see a position, this is what goes through my mind, right? And this is what I want you guys to do as well, because it kind of gives you like a formula in your mind to be able to find the right moves all the time. Maybe not the best moves, but at least you'll find moves that are logical and moves that make sense and are most likely beneficial for your position. So the first thing is to know, again, where you stand, which is kind of like the hardest part of the whole process, is kind of knowing what your position, how your position compares to your opponent's position, right? Are you in a position to attack your opponent? Are you in need to defend, right? What are the things that you should be thinking about, right? So if I'm completely in a much superior position than my opponent, right, then you need to attack right now, right? That's kind of like the mindset you have to have, right? If you're being attacked, you don't have any of that thought process in your head. You have to be like, okay, my position, I need to defend my pieces. I'm in an inferior position. I need to take time to defend, right? None of that, oh, I'm going to attack his king, or all those types of ideas come in. So you have to be able to know where you stand in every position. And then, based on that, you're going to make what I call short-term goals, or kind of like a short-term plan, right? And the reason I say short-term is that chess, it's constantly changing, right? I make a move, and then your opponent can make any move on the chessboard, and now the position is completely different. And you don't know what your opponent will want to play. He can play this, he can play that. You have to be able to adapt to the different positions, right? So by creating a long-term plan, you're going to, it's not really going to work. Like if I had a long-term plan of just checkmate, I'm going to attack his king, and then your opponent ends up just defending all of his pieces and putting it next to his king, you have no chance of attacking, right? That goal is not going to lead anywhere. But by having small goals that are like 2 or 3 moves or something like that, you can actually follow and achieve. And such as, okay, I'm going to obtain an open file, or I'm going to put my knight on this outpost. Small term goals like that are very good. And you should always create some type of goals to kind of guide you into what you want to make, what moves you want to make. And this is the most important part. So once you know kind of where you stand and what you want to do, you have to create a list of moves in your head that you want to consider, right? So you'll consider, maybe every time you see a position, you'll consider 3 or 4 moves or something. Those are called candidate moves. Each of them are candidate moves, right? So if you see in this picture, this is a very, very exaggerated kind of tree. Like he has a couple candidate moves, and in each of those moves, he's analyzed more and more lines deeper and deeper, right? But the whole concept is that he has a few moves to consider. Does that make sense? So he has a few moves to consider, and he has to, after that, after making those moves, or after creating those candidate moves, you have to analyze each of the moves, right? And figure out which one results in the best outcome for yourself. I'm going to go back to our game that we played last session, kind of just talk about, kind of go through the process again. kind of talk about what I'm thinking in all these positions, and kind of just go through that move process, right? So I don't know if you guys remember that game, but this is what was happening, right? So this is all theoretical stuff here. And in this position, right, I'm thinking I have to create some candidate moves. How do I assess this position? Well, I need to defend right now because my knight is being under attack right now, right? I noticed that, and then, okay, now I have to create some candidate moves. How do I defend this knight, right? I can play my queen here, I can play my bishop here, and I can play my knight here, right? Those are my moves to defend this guy, right? I have those in my head, and I think, okay, which one is the most logical, right? And the way you want to do this is you want to just kind of cancel out the moves in your head, right? Is this knight move any good for my position? Well, it kind of blocks my bishop in, which is kind of where I wanted to put my bishop. So I probably would not play this move. Is this queen move any good? Well, it kind of puts this knight into another pin, right? It doesn't really block it because I put another valuable piece in between this pin. So it becomes kind of instinct to play this move because it makes the most sense naturally to me after calculating these things really quickly in my head, right? So this move, like we played, makes a lot of sense. Okay, so now white makes an error here, and now I'm considering a bunch of moves, right? Now he's pretty much pushed his pawn here, and yeah, so now someone tell me some candidate moves that come to mind right now. Like, think of some moves that you would consider at least. They don't have to be good. They just have to be moves that you're considering. Yeah, Arnav, go ahead.
Move the pawn on d6 to e5 so you could kill the pawn, which will kill the knight next.
Okay, good. Okay, so that is a very good candidate move. So Arnav suggested that we just capture this pawn because he's pretty much given it to us for free. And at the same time, oh wow, I did not mean to make the move. Okay. At the same time, we are attacking the knight, right? So that's a very good move. That's one candidate move. I saw Sahiti raise her hand. What was your suggestion?
I was going to say the same thing.
Oh, same thing? Okay. So yeah, that's one move. Obviously look at the captures, right? You want to look at moves that are capturing something else. Those are obviously moves you want to consider immediately. Any other candidate moves? Just anything that comes to mind, right? Obviously this is a move we have to consider. Any other moves that come to your brain immediately, right? Like moves like this don't really should not come into your mind right now because it's not addressing the current tension that's going on in the middle of the board, right? So you want to find moves that make sense towards your position, right? He's offering free material. We have to kind of consider all these different captures. Does that make sense? We want to consider all these things here. So yeah, I think what we ended up playing is this move, which is perfectly fine. So this move is good. This pawn move is also good. This knight move, I'm pretty sure they're all fine actually. This move is just a very bad move by our opponent. So yeah, so you just want to assess, okay, which one of these is the best? And we ended up picking that one, which we were right. This was a good move. And then he takes, and then we take back, and then he recaptures our knight. All kind of forced moves here. And I think here we made a mistake. But I kind of wanted to make some mistakes so you can kind of learn from them, right? So before you guys remember, I don't think any of you guys remember what move we made, but just first name out some candidate moves that you're thinking right now. What are some moves that come to mind immediately? They don't have to be good. They just have to be moves that you have to at least consider.
Okay, the pawn captures e5.
Okay, right. That's perfectly fine. You consider this move for sure, right? This is a capture. You always want to consider all the captures, see if they're beneficial for your position, right? So we kind of look at it, right? We see, okay, if I take his pawn, what is white going to do, right? That's kind of the whole process. I take his pawn, what can white do? Well, white can take my queen. White can recapture the pawn. And that's pretty much both of those are his options at that point, right? And yeah, so if we take this pawn, black's going to recapture with check, right? And then we're going to have to kind of take a move to block that check. So is that good for our position? Well, I wouldn't say it's terrible, but it's probably not the best thing we can, because he's going to recapture with a check, which we don't really want, right? We don't want to get ourselves into positions where we have to respond to his threats. We want to give him problems, right? We want to make him have to deal with our threats, right? In this position, we actually played this move, which is inaccurate, because we have a very strong move here, which is this move right here, which I don't expect any of you guys to find, but it's actually a tactic here. Where we're putting this pawn into a pin. And it's a little bit of a hard tactic to see, because this pawn right here is, it's just a pawn. Like, who cares about putting a pawn into a pin? But we actually can win this pawn in this position if we put it into the pin here. So if he wants to get out of the pin, for example, then we just win a pawn for free. So we converted a pawn trade into a free pawn by moving this pawn, moving the queenie here, right? So yeah, we ended up playing this move, which is okay. It's just a little bit inaccurate here. Okay, so white made this move, right? Putting pressure onto our pawn. So following that same process, what are things that we can do in this position? Tanush, go ahead.
Pawn to c6.
Okay, pawn to c6. Right, that's a very logical move, right? So we want to kind of create this chain and protect the pawn and improve our pawn structure, right? So we kind of solidify this pawn by pushing pawn to c6. So that's obviously one candidate move to consider. And pretty much the other candidate moves are moves that are also protecting this, right? So we have maybe like rook here to defend the pawn, and we have knight here to defend the pawn. But it's good that you kind of see this move as the first thing, right? That's kind of like the first move that comes to my head as well. Because it's just like the easiest way to defend the pawn, right? I don't want to have to move my pieces and put them into positions where I have to defend my pawn. When I can just do a pawn to protect the pawn, and then move my pieces wherever I want them to be, right? I can move them wherever I want him to be. So yeah, this move is pretty logical. Okay, the computer says this move is better, but I disagree. Okay, yeah, so we played a pretty decent move. This move is also fine, apparently, but it's kind of harder it's kind of not as logical, in my opinion, which is fine. Don't try to play like a computer. Oh yeah, another tip, if you're at home and you're analyzing games, don't always like follow the computer. Oh, I should have played this computer move instead. Like, that is a little bit too hard to see. You shouldn't be too like, oh, I need to play the right moves. As long as you're not making mistakes, you're doing fine, right? So we played a perfectly fine move, perfectly sound move, which is good. So he castles, pretty logical. And I think we made an error again here. So what are the moves that come to mind here, right? So we have all of these pieces here that need to be developed, and our king is still not castled, right? So what are some options that come to mind immediately when in this position, right? I think some things like moving our bishop out, right? Kind of getting our bishop out into the game, or moving our knight out, and maybe putting him here, or maybe attacking the queen, right? Some ideas like that, just getting our pieces out. And the last thing I think we considered was just a castle here, because by castling, we kind of we always want to castle, and we've already removed all of these pieces, right? It would take a lot longer to castle if we had to castle this way. So we just like, okay, logically, we should just castle this way, right? But can anyone tell me why castling is a mistake here? Which is what we played, but everyone seemed to be fine with it last time, but no one really saw what the issue was. When you're calculating things like this, you have to kind of think about how the position changes after you make your move, right? So by castling, what changes? The position of the king and the position of the rook, right? This is the easiest way to kind of just logically figure things out, right? Does the king, by moving the king here to here, does that do anything wrong, bad for us? I don't think so, right? The king is not really doing anything important here. So by moving him over here, I don't see any problem with that. So now, okay, just look at the rook. So does the rook moving here does that do anything bad for our position? So no, so everyone thinks that moving the rook over, like let's say I made this move right here. Would this be a bad move for our position? Would this be a bad move? It's a good move. Okay, so it seems like everyone thinks it's a good move. Okay, so notice the queen in the middle of the board, right? It kind of just covers all of these places, kind of goes all over the place, which is really makes it a really strong piece. If you notice that the queen actually targets this pawn here. So when we made this move castle, it's actually a huge error, and we're completely losing now, all of a sudden. And it seems like, whoa, now we're losing. What happened, right? We were doing fine, and now we're suddenly losing. And the reason is because we just missed one small thing. Our pawn is gone. And we're like, okay, he takes our pawn, so what, right? Well, at this point, now so many things are becoming a problem in our position. Now, suddenly our king is not in safety anymore, right? His queen is right next to our king, right? We lost one of the pawns that was supposed to protect ourselves. Okay? So by making this small error, we actually completely are losing now. And now white will have ideas like this, right? Where he maneuvers his knight into our weak squares now, right? Because he removed the pawn, now he can move his knight here and attack our king. So now suddenly we're actually in a really, really bad position here. So when you're considering moves, you have to make sure you're not making any errors. That's like the first thing you should do, right? Like in this position, right? Any of these moves are not bad. None of them are really like bad, like really, really bad. But you just have to figure out which one's the best. And I thought that this one was the best, so I played it, which makes sense. But this one, we should not even consider this move because of the pawn. So that's why the computer will say a move just like this is best, right? Developing a knight. It doesn't lose the pawn, and we're doing fine. We'll just put the bishop knight out, and we can probably just castle this way. It's safer. Okay. So luckily our opponent did not see that and missed the right move here, which is just to take the pawn. Okay, so we made another error here. Now knowing that our pawn is hanging, what move can we make here? It's a bit hard because you notice that, okay, well, we wanted to respond to this threat, right? That was what in the game when we were thinking, once he made this move, we immediately started going, okay, our rook is attacked. What do we do, right? We started to think about moves like, okay, I can block it. I can do this. But now knowing that your pawn is under attack, he's attacked two things at the same time. How can we address both of these issues at the same time? So it might be a bit hard because you're thinking, okay, I move my rook, he takes my pawn. I move my pawn, he takes my rook, right? So, and I block, well, that doesn't address this issue. We trade the pieces and then he takes my pawn again, right? So, I don't think this is a little bit too advanced to see, but by making this move right here, right? By making this move, pawn to f6, we attack the bishop and we block the rook. So indirectly, we're protecting this pawn because we force him to address one of our issues first. You see that? So by moving our pawn here, he can't take our pawn because we'll win a piece. And we also block the attack on our rook at the same time. You see that? So here, obviously we didn't see that the pawn was hanging, so we ended up making a move like this. And yeah, so the move was this, but we made this move, and the reason it's bad is you can just trade them and then win the pawn again. But he did not see that, so he retreated back. And I think at this point, I kind of, in the game, kind of went into a little bit of depth of kind of analyzing at this point. So at this point, we noticed that our pawn was hanging, right? And what are some suggestions that came into mind, right? So we had I think we had king here to protect the pawn. We had, I think, pawn up or something like that to just protect the pawn, and then we had this move. Those were our candidate moves, right? I'll just give them to you right there. So our moves are like this, right? Those are our three moves that we're considering making. And is it kind of clear why we ended up choosing this move? Does that make sense? can you give me a reason why these moves are bad? Because if you can eliminate those other options, it makes choosing the right move really, really easy. So, so what was the error of making this move?
It's not a good move because then the queen can capture the pawn and give check to the king.
Well, the point of moving our king here is to protect the pawn, right? So once we move our king here, he can't take our pawn because we just recapture and take his queen, right? So that's not like, the whole purpose of our move is to prevent him from taking the pawn, right? So he should not be able to do that anymore because we protect it. So yeah, he does put us in check, but remember his queen is not supported here, so we could just capture it.
Maybe it's if the black king moves, then white can push the pawn on e5 one square. So then it'll be like a discovered check.
Right.
But then they also win the queen.
Yeah. Okay, exactly. So the reason why we couldn't play this move is if you notice that this bishop kind of x-rays through this pawn and hits the king, right? So by pushing this pawn, he delivers a check, which is a tactic we talked about, the discover attack, right? And at the same time, he's actually attacking our queen with this pawn move. That's why this move we had to eliminate, because he was going to win our queen actually immediately by doing that. So yeah. And we also considered this move, right? Why did we get rid of that move? And it's probably a bit harder to see, but I think the clearest reason is that it weakens our squares around our king drastically. If you can notice, it's a bit harder to explain here, but you should not ever play a move like this that allows pieces to infiltrate onto squares that are very close to your king. Do you see that? So by making this move, his queen can still enter here, and this is very dangerous because now he's gonna push his pawn and attack our king. You kind of just don't want his queen to be anywhere around here. Yeah, you do protect your pawn, but you want to make sure that the queen you don't allow the queen to come in, right? You want to keep all the pieces away from it. So that's why our move that we made in game is very, very good, and definitely a very strong move here. Is just block the queen from ever coming into our position, right? We don't give him any opportunity to mess with us. Okay, yeah. So like a move like this would be very, very bad. Yeah, see, as you can see, because probably moves like, yeah, see, now we're completely losing because moves like queen here, moves like knight here to knight here. Yeah, so we did play this move here. And white made an error here by taking our pawn. Can someone give me a time check? What time is it right now? Do we have to start our game soon?
It's 3:30, so.
3:30. Okay, well, we'll get through this in like 5 more minutes and then we'll start our game. Yeah, so the whole reason of going through this game is to kind of train you guys to kind of think tactically and think strategically, like at the basic level at the very least, right? So we see things like, okay, strategically, tactically, a move like this is very, very bad. Tactically, right? It's tactically flawed because of this move. And a move like this is more of a strategical flaw because, well, now our pawns, the squares around our king are very, very not safe here. They're weakened by pushing this pawn, right? So I want you guys to be able to think like that. Okay, before I make every move, I need to consider what are the problems with this move, right? And what are the benefits of this move? So he takes, which is obviously a blunder, right? Everyone sees that. He only has one defender. We have 2 attackers on this square, so we end up winning a knight. Okay, and at this point, I think we actually played very, very well at this point. I remember looking at this game, and I think we played almost every move like perfectly, if I remember correctly. So he plays there. We capture, right? And then we're trying to trade off these pawns and get our knight out, right? That is perfect according to perfect for the computer, right? This is all logical, strategical ideas. And there's a lot less tactics here, so we don't really have to worry about that stuff. And our idea is perfect, right? We move our rook out and trade the rooks off. Perfect, perfect. And then, these are all good moves. Yeah, so at this point, there's no point of really analyzing because everything's pretty much winning at this point. Okay, so we can just get into our game. So when we're playing this game, we're gonna focus a lot on creating candidate moves, right? I want you guys to kind of go through that process every single time. That's how it goes. And in actual chess games, if you want to go compete, I will tell you that you get a lot of time. You'll get like 3 hours for the whole game on your side. So, and your opponent has like 3 hours. So you have a lot of time to think about each move. I will probably spend about like 5 minutes at least on all of my moves. So yeah, you can take your time. Here, we're gonna have to think a little bit faster, but that's fine because our opponent's probably gonna make some errors that we can capitalize on pretty quickly. Yeah, so what moves do people like making on move 1? Just e4? Yeah, go ahead. e4? Yeah, okay. So most people play moves like e4, d4, c4 even, just, listing out some moves that people play. It doesn't really matter. They're all good. So we'll just play something that I'm more familiar with, and I like the positions that end up recurring after e4. Oh, okay. Everyone likes playing this move. All right, so everyone's comfortable with playing. We're just gonna go through the opening pretty quickly, right? Everyone it's not a big deal, right? So all the moves are pretty logical, right? Just develop our pieces, push our pawns, do all this stuff, castle. We'll worry about all that calculation stuff once I'll go on later. Okay, I'm just gonna play some normal stuff. So again, we're applying this idea where we attack the knight and we pressure this pawn. So he plays this move. So what should we do here? What's the idea? What was the idea of this move? Arnav, go ahead.
Move the bishop on b5 to c4 so no one would attack.
Okay, that's a move. But what was the idea of moving our bishop here? Do you remember? We kind of talked about this last time, where by moving our bishop here, we pressure this knight, which is guarding this pawn, right? So this is like the tactical thing, right? This is the removing the defender idea. By taking this knight, this pawn becomes undefended. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we're just gonna capture, and once he recaptures, we can get this knight. Oh, we can get this pawn. So I'll actually let you guys know that this move is actually not a free pawn. He can actually bring his queen to this square and attack both of our things at the same time. This is I don't know if he knows these types of things, like these, okay, he does. All right, so our opponent does know the right moves, which is fine. This is perfectly fine. So yeah, what's the issue? What's the problem in this position? What do we have to?
Knight.
Right. So what moves
Knight
can we
on
make?
e5 to f3.
Right. So that's a move that we should consider.
What if you moved queen to h5?
Okay. So another consideration that's someone suggested was queen h5 to protect the pawn this way, right?
Yeah.
So can anyone tell me why that's a bad move? Can anyone tell me why this move is yeah, go ahead, Nidesh.
Because once the white queen moves on h5,
Yeah.
then the black king can give check on the it can give check on the white king
By going where?
by capturing the pawn.
Okay. So yeah, that was well, that's the initial threat, right? We have to okay, so Hiti, go ahead. Okay, sorry. We had to protect the knight, right? So anyway we protect the knight, he's gonna capture our pawn with check. There's nothing we can do about that, right? So what is a bigger problem by moving our queen here? Okay, well, if he finds
There's
it,
nothing wrong with this move, and you know it.
Yeah, okay, so he did find the move, which is why the move is bad. If he pressures the queen, we have to move our queen, right? And then we lose protection of the knight, right? So moving our queen out early is usually a bad idea because of this. Maybe
you could move the queen to g5.
Okay, so the idea, yeah, so his
And then
idea
if they
is-
move bishop to e7, you can retreat to g3.
Okay, just give me a second. Yeah, so in general, you don't want to move your queen out too early because he has so many moves to kind of just attack you and at the same time develop his pieces at the same time, right? You don't want to bring your queen out too early to, because you'll just run into all these problems, right? He's going to keep attacking you. And in this case, it's even worse because we used our queen to protect the knight, and now we can't protect the knight anymore because we had to retreat. You said queen here. Does anyone tell me why that doesn't work? We're trying to protect the knight, right? We don't want to move away because he was a squinter knight. So
If he pushes his pawn, he'll do a double attack on the knight and the queen.
yeah, exactly. So Anirudh, you see that, Anirudh? So when you move your queen here, he can fork you, right? He will double attack you.
Thank you, Jay. I'm working on my tactics.
Yeah, so that's why it's important to improve your tactical ability so you don't miss these things, right? You'll fork your pieces and you're going to lose your knight again. So actually, there's not really many options we have here. We're actually just losing the piece. There's nothing we can do about it. It's kind of unfortunate. Actually, wait, let me see. Okay, I'm going to pull off some, I'm going to try to do something. So I'm going to try to play this move, right? And the idea is if he takes our queen, we take his queen, right? That's the idea, right? So, and we're still protecting our knight here, so we're fine. For now, at least. And the idea is if he just takes this pawn, okay, so this is perfect. So the whole idea of this, right, by trying to make him take this pawn. So now we can retreat our queen here. And we're still protecting the knight because our pawn's gone now. So previously, if we retreated here and he could just take our knight because our pawn's in the way, we can't capture. But now he's captured, we can block the check and protect the knight at the same time. So now we don't lose the piece. So yeah, I don't expect you guys to find a move like that, but yeah. I don't know if this is actually forced. He could probably just do something like this, but yeah. So he does take, and then he fell into our trap, and then we can just exchange pieces here. And now our knight is still there, so we're doing fine. Okay, yeah, so like I said, he was able to get this move in by attacking our queen and allows him to develop his bishop this way if he feels, which was not great for us. So any suggestions? What should we do with this knight? We can either retreat, right? Obviously, we have retreating options, like any of these four. And we also have supporting options where we just support the knight there. Our knight in the center is good, right? Because it controls a lot of squares and it attacks a lot of things, right? And it's just a very powerful piece, kind of in his territory. In general, we kind of want to keep the piece there, right? So by retreating, it's a fine move, but it kind of just makes our position a little bit worse because we kind of putting our really good piece on a less effective square.
Maybe you could play d4.
Right. So any of these supporting moves where we play d4 or f4 to protect the knight is probably best. So I picked this one. So we open up the diagonal for the bishop and we recapture. So he does end up taking our knight off of the board, but we also got rid of his bishop, which was going to probably be very hard to get rid of in the future if we left it there. Okay, so he attacks our king. So what's the most logical way to get rid of this check? So what are the ways to get out of a check? You can either capture the piece, that's a checking you, right? There's no way to capture this piece. So the other options are to block and to move our king. Those are the two other options. So we can either block with the pawn, right? Or we can retreat our king. Tanush?
Pawn f3.
Pawn f3. So why pawn f3 over something like king e1 or king f1?
No, because you're blocking the bishop from attacking.
Right. So, but why does this move is better than something like retreating the king? We could get out of the check easily by just moving our king, right? Anywhere we want to. We have a lot of options.
You're also developing your pawns by moving it.
Exactly. So we're kind of progressing our pawns toward the board, controlling some squares in the center. But most importantly, we're just attacking the bishop at the same time, right? So we're forcing him to retreat. That's kind of like a topic that I want to cover later, maybe next time, where when you're considering moves, you want to find moves that are always giving your opponent problems, and they have to respond to them. So we could have retreated right here. We could have retreated or something, but then he can just freely like castle now, and now he's creating more threats by playing rook here, right? So we don't want to run into all those issues. We just give him a problem, he has to address it first, and now it's our turn again, so we're doing fine. Okay, so you know black wants to castle, right? That's kind of like what he wants to do next, right? He wants to castle, get his king to safety, bring his rook onto the... Oh yeah, go ahead, Dinesh, go ahead. Why do you want to control the square?
If you move your bishop over there, when he castles, you can get the rook.
Okay, that's good thinking. Sorry. Okay, so one rule about chess is that you're not allowed to castle through a check. Does that make sense? So, like, by covering this square, he's actually not allowed to castle by the rules of chess, because there's a rule that you're not allowed to castle. You're not allowed to kind of like imagine the king moving through this square. All the squares between have to be not controlled by any opposing pieces. So by moving my bishop here, he's not allowed to castle. Like, he's actually just not allowed to. So, and yeah, I also prevent his rook from coming here, which, Dinesh said, was, yeah. So preventing his rook to occupy the file, which is also another good reason to make that move. Yeah, so obviously we would be considering a bunch of developing moves, right? We would consider bishop here. We would consider maybe like knight here or knight here. So kind of to pick the best one, we're looking for the ones that actually do something, right? Do something direct. If something does something directly, then we should always pick that move first. This move does something by controlling that square, which is very important. While moves like this don't really do as much, right? So yeah, our opponent's obviously thinking to how to get rid of this bishop because he really wants to castle here. Yeah, so he plays a good move. He's trying to attack our bishop, right? So this is actually a good point here. So I said making this move was good because of that, and I wanted to illustrate that point. However, black does have options to just kick out our bishop, right? And we don't really have a way to kind of keep control of this square. Do you guys see that? Because if we retreat, he's going to push this pawn forward. And now I have to retreat here. And now he can just castle. So his goal is to kind of just like kick our bishop away. So he's able to castle. But moving our bishop here, he can just capture our bishop, right? And then just castle. So yeah, so I'll just do this move to try to keep control of it, but this move is probably coming, right? To block the bishop off. And I'm gonna have to retreat, and yeah, so he's, yeah, so yeah, it doesn't really matter where I retreat. I'm just gonna retreat here because at least I'll have this diagonal. And this one I kind of run into the pawn here. Okay, so he doesn't castle. I'm not sure why, but he decides to make this move, I guess because he wants to develop his knight here, right? So he wants to get rid of this pawn so he can put his knight here, right? That's his goal. We did that in the game before too, where we moved this pawn to try to get the knight out. So any suggestions? Do we want to take this pawn? Is that a move that, I mean, we can consider it, but is it a move that we want to be making, right? Do we want to be making a move like this? No, right? Because by making a move like this, it allows him to just recapture and develop his knight at the same time. We don't want him to be able to move his knight out, right? We want to keep his knight there. So strategically, we should not take this pawn, right? So what other options do we have? Well, we have to protect our pawn somehow. He's going to capture us. If we don't capture him, we have to protect it. And we can't push because he can capture us. We can't protect it with a pawn because he'll capture us. So what do we do? I think I said that after here, I could go here or here, right? So if I initially just went to this square right here, right? I would be defending this guy. But now I'm here, right? And now he's doing this. So, but we don't want to go back, right? Because we kind of just came from there. And yeah, he can just trade them off. And there's actually a better move here than bishop here, if anyone can find it. Is there another way to defend the pawn that actually creates a threat for the opponent at the same time? You can consider this move for sure. That's a candidate move. But if you find good moves, you should always look for better ones. Oh, okay, yeah. So okay, so we're running low on time. So I think yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Bishop d4.
Right. So the idea behind bishop d4 is to apply pressure on his pawn, right? So by this, he's not technically forced to take our pawn because he can still recapture. But by playing this bishop d4 move, we're creating that threat. So now he has to respond to that. He can't just castle or do whatever he wants. He has to respond to this threat. And if he takes, well, that's great for us, right? Because once we recapture, what's happening in that position? Once our bishop is here, right? We're attacking all of his pieces at the same time, which is good for us. And his knight still can't get out, right? Because he can't take, once our bishop takes back, we still control that square. So his knight can't get to where he wants it to be. Okay, so he decided to protect his pawn with his king, which is good for us because now he didn't castle, right? So now his king's a little bit exposed. And I think it's fine for him now because it's kind of in the, we've already traded off the queens, we've traded off some material. So the king is, being less exposed is actually okay because I have less pieces to attack him, right? So he's actually not, this is not a terrible move. Okay, so what, I don't know. There's not really a clear move to make here. Okay, so does anyone have any suggestions? I don't think anything's really obvious here. Just any moves. Like in these types of positions, you just have to make pretty just normal moves, like just developing moves probably, right? So like knight here is probably a move that we could make. Moving our rook over is a move we can make. So yeah, I'm just gonna move the rook over. Yeah, okay, I'll move the rook over because I'm planning to move the king over anyway, right? I want to kind of get him to safety. And by moving my rook here, yeah, it's currently blocked, but once I move my king over, it's right behind this pawn. And it's if we exchange, then this file will be open, and that's exactly where my rook wants to be. Okay, so he does play that move. So what does this move do, right? Our king is right here. So what does that mean about this pawn, right? It's pinned. Does everyone see that? The pawn's pinned right now. So we don't have that option. And at the same time, he's attacking our pawn. So he is threatening to take our pawn now because we only have one piece defending it. So what is the only way to defend our pawn? We don't want to lose the pawn, right? For free, for nothing. So we had to defend him somehow.
King to f2.
King to f2. Okay. So yeah, so that move is pretty logical, right? King f2, like I said, to open up the file of the rook. So the rook protects the pawn. Okay, so even though it's his turn, you should still always use your opponent's time to think about what you want to do next, right? So consider things like that. If he takes you, how do you want to recapture, right? So do you want to recapture this way? Do you want to recapture this way? You should probably think about it so you don't have to spend more time when it comes on your turn, because we're low on time, right? So if you're ever low on time in a game, you should always use your opponent's time to start thinking. Okay, so he doesn't take us. So that move, does anyone know the idea of his move? Can anyone tell me what the point of that move is? Okay, So, okay, so it seems like no one knows directly. So the idea of this move is to control this square so he can actually push this pawn again, right? And he's trying to do attack. He's trying to set up a tactic here. By this move, we have to retreat, and he's going to win the pawn. He's going to remove this defender off of the bishop, off the pawn. So, because we know that he's trying to do this, what is a way to stop that? How can we control this square? Because we know we don't want him to do that.
On
Yeah, go ahead. Anybody? Go ahead.
B2 to B4.
Exactly. So by playing this move, I'm not certain if it's the best, but it's a move that is at least going to prevent him from playing this move, because once he plays this, then we will recapture twice, and then we're going to win a pawn in the end. And yeah, so it's kind of discouraged. Okay, so he does end up playing it. Obviously, we're going to take him because that's the reason why we played this move. And yes, he will win our pawn, but now his pawn structure is a bit weak. He has 3 isolated pawns, and I think we're doing fine here. Okay. So now what's the logical move? Just develop, right? Just do something normal, because there's nothing that's really going on. We should just get our rook into the game, right? So we should move our knight. So something like this would make a lot of sense, right? Most likely he's going to play something like this. He's finally able to get that pawn off of that square. Exactly. Okay, so what's a move now that can pressure this pawn right here? This pawn's isolated right now, right? It's very weak. So what is a move that we can make to pressure that pawn? Again, we want to keep giving our opponent issues, right? Does anyone see a way we can pressure this pawn?
Knight to C4.
Right. So knight C4 here by pressuring this pawn. And there's no, he's most likely going to have to undevelop his knight this way to defend the pawn. So, and then he's attacking our bishop. So let's just retreat him here, I guess. And like we could have retreated anywhere, but I kind of wanted to keep the bishop on this square, mainly because it kind of controls some squares in his territory and makes his development a little bit more uncomfortable for him, right? I could have developed here, but it blocks the rook and it doesn't really control any squares that are useful right now. So we have very little time, so we should probably think about moves that we want to make next. So obviously moves like rook here to establish put our rook on a very active square is pretty good next, right? Or if anyone has any other better suggestions. So we're just gonna make this move, right? So we want to at least put our last piece that's not currently developed into play. We also pressure this knight. It's currently protected, but it always sets up tactics now, right? If we ever can remove this bishop, then this knight is not protected. So okay, can anyone tell me why that's a bad move?
You only have 10 seconds.
Okay, so I can just take this pawn, right? Because he's blocked his protection of that pawn by moving his bishop back. Does everyone see that? So now this pawn, which was previously defended twice, okay, so now we can recapture. And we got that pawn. Okay, so he can win this pawn, I guess. So I will play this move because I don't want to take, because if I take, then he's going to get this open file. So by making this move, if he takes, then I keep the rook on the open file, and his rook is still here. Okay, does that make sense? So now I keep the active rook here. So exciting. Okay, so now we have a tactic here. So can you guys, does anyone just, okay, we really have no time. Shoot, should have picked a bit better time control. So by playing this move right here, right? So we attack the king and we attack the pawn at the same time, right? And our bishop protects that square. So we win a pawn now. So like the reason I can see that like kind of faster is because I've done tactics and I've recognized these patterns, right? I see that the king and the pawn are in the same rank here. And then I kind of recognize, okay, yeah, I can win material like now, right now. And now I see another tactic, right? Again, the same thing is going on. I'm setting up this new tactic. So if he doesn't address that issue, then I will play this move and win another pawn. And I also will see things like this. So the bishop, you notice that this is a dark squared bishop. If I move my bishop onto this square, his rook and his king are not on the right squares at that moment because he's going to lose the rook. And right now I can't make this move, but in the future, okay, like if I ever wanted to make that maneuver, then okay, so he does move. But that does not solve the issue, right? This issue here. And now I'm forking again. So if I keep winning his pawns, right, I'm just gonna have a bunch of pawns and he won't have any. And now I have this passed pawn. And this is we're probably gonna win now, right? Okay, so we can take either of these pawns. I'm gonna take this pawn because this way I create two isolated pawns, which are both weak. By taking the other way, these pawns are still kind of maintain their position and they're not as weak. Okay, so he's protecting his pawn, which is logical. Okay, so he's probably trying to play rook down here, right? Trying to attack us, so we're just gonna move our king. Maybe try to attack this pawn if we want to, but we just don't want to get ourselves into checks where we have to respond. We kind of just want to react to them before we get into those problems, right? So our next idea is either we can just try to win this pawn or we can just exchange the pawn off. Here, I'm going to play this move. I'm going to explain. So this move just prevents him to push his pawn, right? I want to keep his pawn there. Because he was threatening to just push the pawn and then it's a passed pawn. I don't want to deal with that, right? So by putting my bishop there, I just prevent him from moving at all. Okay, so he's attacking my rook, right? Obviously I have to move him. So where should I move him? Okay, I'm gonna move him here. I'm gonna move him here, right? Because I want to give him, he has to respond to that at least, right? And then I'll give him another issue, attack his rook, attack his pawn. So yeah, in the end game, you always want to keep attacking your opponent's weak spots. And here I can move my king up, I guess, to threaten to take the pawn. So as you'll see, all I'm doing is continuously applying pressure onto him. Yeah, so he's attacking my pawn, but that's fine because I can take this with the tempo, or sorry, with the check, and he's forced to move. And then I can address this issue after. So now I have three, beautiful pawns that are just going to be marching down the board. Okay, so I can just push him, right? So that's probably the most natural way to defend the pawn. What time is it right now?
4:07.
Okay. Yeah, so black doesn't really have any ideas. My pawn is protected by the bishop. He can't move his pawn, so I feel pretty safe and I feel fine. He might try to check me or something, but it's not a big deal. So I'm just going to push this pawn. It's a passed pawn. I'm just going to start pushing him. Also, don't allow this check, right? Okay, so he checks me. Just going to move my king over. Don't want to move him here because he's going to keep checking me, and I don't want to deal with that. Okay, I'm going to move my rook over here because I don't want to, his king keeps putting pressure on my rook, and it kind of makes me not really kind of feel unsafe to push this pawn, right? So I want to just move my rook into just safety and then start pushing my pawn, right? So I don't have to deal with any issues with my rook. So the idea from here is pretty straightforward. Just start pushing your pawns, and there's really just no way he can stop us, right? Okay, just attack his king. He has to move the king and start pushing the pawns. Just keep it going. Okay, so like we have to make sure we don't. This rook is stays protected, right? So we can't push this pawn right now, right? Or else he could just take our rook. So we just push this pawn. So yeah, just make sure all your pieces are supported and safe, and then you should be fine. Okay, so he's attacking our rook again. I guess we can just deliver a check, right? Just keep making him move his king, start pushing our pawns. Same concept. So does anyone have any ideas here? How should I go on? I can't push any of these pawns, right? So how should I keep going? What should I do now? Okay, so since we're low on time, I'm just going to move my king so I can start pushing this pawn, right? And then I have 3 pawns, all at the same rank here. And I can just keep marching them. Okay, all right, so now he just offers me a rook trade, which is fine. So I'll just accept it because the less pieces on the board, the less I have to deal with, right? In the end game, if you're winning, just trade off pieces. That's always good for you. And now there's nothing he can really, bother me with, that rook. I mean, if that rook was on the board, he could keep checking me and just giving me problems. I don't really want to deal with any of that. So I just exchange them off. That's the easiest way to capitalize on any material advantage. All right, so just push the pawn, right? He's attacking our pawn. Just push it. Okay, let's just push this pawn. We can't push this pawn because it's protecting this guy, so we have to, use our other pawns. And also, let's say we only had like 1 pawn here, just to talk about something. If we only had like 1 or 2 pawns here, and it's not really easy to push our pawns, we still have another pawn. So if that were ever the case, we would probably have to use this guy as well, right? Because he probably won't be able to control 2 sides of the board at the same time. So it's really, really nice if you have pawns on like both sides of the board, and he has to address both at the same time. It's very hard, especially if he doesn't have like long range pieces like bishops and rooks and stuff like that. So obviously we want to push this pawn next, right? Or push this pawn, but we just want to promote, right? That's the ultimate goal. But that's not that clear right now, because if we push this pawn right now, then we're losing control of this pawn. So we need to make sure all the pawns are still safe. So how should we keep going? Like, what is a move that I should be making next? Any suggestions to how I should, get my pawns down to promote them? So, okay, so to give you guys some ideas, how would I push this pawn, right? I would have to somehow first protect this guy. So what is a way I could protect him? Because I ultimately do want to push this pawn to, check, and then to, keep advancing them together. Because connected pawns are always stronger than just singular pawns. So we need to make sure they're all protect each other, but this pawn in the front is not going to be protected once we move this one. So how would we protect him before advancing this pawn? How would we protect our pawn on f6?
Maybe you could move the bishop.
To where?
D8.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. So by moving our bishop to d8 next move, we prevent him from capturing our pawn once we move this pawn, right? So, and we don't really need our bishop here to blockade this pawn anymore, because he doesn't really have the rook behind it to support the pushing. So once he pushes that pawn, I can just capture it. It seems like my opponent kind of just gave up here and just doesn't want to play anymore. So I think we should just end. I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it's pretty straightforward how I'm going to win this game. So yeah, just keep practicing, I guess. And yeah, that's all from me this time.
All right, then. Yeah, and if he's just trying to stall, then yeah, we'll see you guys on Saturday. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Nice talking to you guys again. See you guys next time.